All right. So where we left off, I was asking if people want to, either just give a shout out or talk within tables really quickly and define what implicit bias means to either them or just what they think maybe a dictionary definition is of it.
And they did that. They talked about it.
Okay, perfect. Well, we will move right on, and I'll give you what my definition is. So my definition here is a bias or prejudice that is present but not consciously held or recognized, and also a term or phrase used to describe when we have attitudes towards people or associate stereotypes with them without conscious knowledge. So the main points I want to pay attention to here are without conscious knowledge or without or not consciously held. Great. So to start us off today, like I said, we're going to do a quick little activity that just has to do with understanding implicit bias. And that will kind of help frame the conversation as to why I started Anti-Racist Midland and why we got into Voices of Black Midland. And I promise you will know what those things mean by the end of this, but I will just keep on referring to them for now, and then we'll get into what those mean in just a little bit. So on the slide here, you see some words on a slide, and these are general consensus positive words. So what we're going to do here today is we're going to pretend that we're doing a psych study. It's a low-tech categorization of various words and phrases that you'll see in just a bit. So what I want you to do is take your hands and put them in your lap. So your left hand is going to slap your left leg, and your right hand is going to slap your right leg. Very simple, like I said, low-tech. And what I'm asking you to do here today is categorize certain words by slapping the appropriate leg for the correct word or phrase. So this will be one of two things I'll have you do today. The first is going to be categorize words if they're generally positive words or if they're generally negative words. So you can see here, these are consensus positive words. We're not looking for idiosyncratic responses today. I know you guys all may have had a vacation from hell or thinking someone's laughter is more irritating than not, but that's not the point here today. The point here is that these are consensus positive words. And same thing here, we're looking at consensus negative words. So for any reason you have a positive affinity for any of these words, just throw that out the window for the next 10 minutes and understand that these are consensus negative words. So the second task for today, so the first was deciphering between positive and negative words. The second task today is going to be deciphering between white sounding names and black sounding names. So here we have a list of black sounding names, and keep in mind, like I said, these are generically black sounding names. I'm black, I don't have any one of these names, and you may not be black and you may have one of these names. So I'm not suggesting that neither you or I were named incorrectly, but these are just consensus names. And finally, before we actually get into the experiment, you'll see a list here of generally consensus white sounding names. So like I said, there are white people tuning in today who don't have these names, and we may have non-white people tuning in today who have these names. Nothing's wrong with that. Let's just go with the consensus for today. And just a reminder, like I said earlier, the task you're going to be engaging is today is slapping your left hand, right hand. I'll give directions as needed. But what I'm going to have you guys do is I'm going to time you guys. So you guys are going to see the words come up in the middle of the screen, and you're going to, the first one we're going to do here is that you're going to see the positive and negative or phrase unpleasant and pleasant words. You're going to see those come up on the screen in just a second. And when you do, you're going to slap your left side, your left lap, if it's an unpleasant word, and your right side, if it's a pleasant word. And like I said, I'm going to time you guys today, so go through it as fast as possible. And if you make a mistake, which you will know if you do, you just go back, fix it, and continue down the list. So the words are going to come down the middle of the slide, just like you just saw earlier, and you're going to go through and start. So when you're done, raise your hand, and I have a pretty good view of the room, so when I get a general consensus that the room is done, I'll stop the timer and we'll continue on. Got it? All right. So the first words are going to come up to the screen in 3, 2, 1, go. All right, I see a couple hands. And so that was about 24 seconds. So pretty good. So like I said, just continue. We'll see a couple more of these examples and you can continue on. So the next thing you're going to see are slap your left leg if you see a black sounding name, and slap your right sound if you see a white sounding name. But other than that, all the same rules will apply. Raise your hand when you're done going through the list. All right. And these names will pop up in 3, 2, 1, go. All right, perfect. 30 seconds again, so just about the same as the last time, so that's good for the start of the day. So we're going to continue on and run a similar trial here. We're just going to combine the two. So trial 1, we just went through the pleasant and unpleasant words. Trial 2, we went through the white sounding names, black sounding names, and trial 3, we're just going to combine them together. So nothing crazy here, but on the slap your left side if you see an unpleasant word or a black sounding name. And we want to slap your right side if you see a pleasant word or a white sounding name. Perfect. All right, so you're going to see the words come up in just a second. In 3, 2, 1, go. All right, perfect. That was 29 seconds. So you guys were actually a little bit faster at combining the two than the other ones. That's great. All right, so we're similar thing. We're going to do the same thing, just going to cleanse your perception palette a little bit. So I've changed the colors that you're going to see. So instead of that green and blue, you're just going to see yellow and red. So nothing different, but we're just cleansing your perception palette a little bit here. So this time we're going to do left side if you see an unpleasant word, right side if you see a pleasant word. This is the first thing we did today, so nothing crazy here. And you're going to see those words pop up in 3, 2, 1, go. Great. All right, 22 seconds. We are getting sharp. And we're going to continue on. We're going to do this, our second to last trial we're going to do today. But this is a new one. This is, in fact, a reversal of what you guys have done. So before you guys were doing a slap on the right-hand side if it was a right sounding name, but this time we're going to switch it around. And you were going to do slap a left side if it's a white sounding name, and slap your right side if it is a black sounding name. So similar trial, just opposite sides that you guys are doing. These words are going to pop up in 3, 2, 1, go. Perfect. All right, 22 seconds. We're getting quick. And this is going to be our last trial of the day. So like last time we combined everything together, we're going to do the same thing again. So this time words are going to come up down the middle of the column as always, but this time we're going to do slap your left side if it is an unpleasant word or a white sounding name, and slap your right side if it is a pleasant word or a black sounding name. Got it? All right, I'm going to start us off in 3, 2, 1, go. All right, perfect. That came in at 41 seconds. So we'll get into what all that means in just a second. But the first thing I want to ask here is, when I first asked you the original trial, when you did, your left side, right side, we had the left side is unpleasant if a black name, or a black name, excuse me, or right side if it's a pleasant or white sounding name. I was recording on my phone here how much time it took you guys. That one took you guys 21 seconds. So that one was pretty fast, right? But this last trial that we just did, I asked you guys to do left side if unpleasant or white name, and right side if pleasant or black name. And that took us 40 seconds. So just about double the time to go through the same trial, right? But just flipping it around. And I know the first question people may ask is that, there's a lot of questions we can ask, but oftentimes what people do ask about this is, it's the mix of the colors, the mix of the order. We learn things. And let me tell you something, the order, the colors, left-handed, right-handed, none of it matters. So this is actually adapted from a psychology professor I used to work with in undergrad. And he has many versions of this PowerPoint actually. And no matter what order you can put all these combinations in through, you're going to get the same results. That finding this left hand if unpleasant or a white sounding name, and right side if pleasant or black sounding name is almost always going to take about 1.5 to 2 times as long to do this trial. So what does this mean? And I want to ask you guys rhetorically, I might add, is why? Why do you guys think that this trial took twice as long as the first trial that you guys see here on the screen? Anyone can come off and shout it out, or if it's a little bit difficult to hear, feel free to talk within tables about it, and then we can come back in about a minute. All right, perfect. I'll wrap up those conversations. I'm definitely interested in hearing what some people have to say, but potentially maybe when a microphone is passed around a bit later, I can definitely get some feedback from you guys. But what we just did, in short, is a low-tech version of the implicit associations test. So I'm sure some of you guys may have heard of this test, and if you go online, it won't be names that you'll see. It will actually just be faces. And let me tell you, the same thing happens with faces. There's implicit associations are something that we are naturally born with. And these are things that people have innately. And like I said before, when we first started, that they are often unconscious. So 80 million times, this test has been taken online, and 75% of the time, you're gonna get that unpleasant white takes longer to do than the original trial that we did today. So again, what does this mean? Let me tell you. We're here today to figure out how we can live with history and what living with history truly means, right? So there's 3 points I want to make here. One is associations like these are pervasive. They infiltrate our daily life, whether we think about it or not, and they can be unconscious. They can persist even when we don't want them to, and I'm going to put emphasis on the word can here. They can be brought to our awareness via education, which is a main reason why I'm here today, and a main reason why I helped found Anti-Racist Midland. And finally, that these pervasions can influence judgment and behavior. So again, another reason why Anti-Racist Midland was born. We came to the realization that the present day mindset of Midland, Michigan and the greater community of Midland, Michigan definitely needs some education brought to the light. And we want to bring this light to not only how historical mindsets have influenced Midland, but also how we can create history ourselves and change the way current and future minds think about race in our community. So I would love for you guys all to go back and take more of the versions of these tests. It's not just white sounding, black sounding names on this website. There's a ton of various implicit biases that you can test on this website. And if you are someone today that said, hey, I think everyone else in this room is just slow, I did all of these with 20 seconds and I was good to go, great. I promise you, if you go on the site, you'll find some tests that will find some type of bias that you have, because there are plenty of them to take, and you will definitely find something. These are innate, like I said, and almost all of us have these type of biases built into us, whether we know it or we don't. So I definitely urge you guys to go and take a look at this website when you get the chance. All right, so I'm gonna set the stage with Midland, Michigan first before I get into what Anti-Racist Midland is and why we founded it, et cetera, et cetera. So Midland, Michigan, for those of you guys who don't know where it is on the east side of the state. It is near Bay City and Saginaw, if you are familiar with those, and we're about 2 hours north of Detroit. So you would take Grand Raleigh's campus. If you go just about straight east, a little bit further north as well, you will hit Midland, Michigan. So Midland, Michigan, again, setting the stage here, population about 4,200 based off the 2021 census. Average household income, this is an important one, it's about $15,000 higher than the Michigan average household income. Demographics, again, an important one to pay attention to here. Midland is almost 94% white. And the other minority groups that make up the rest of Midland of any substantial amount include Asians, which are 2.4%, and the Black community being 1.5%. I like to joke, when my family first moved to Midland, we increased the Black population by about 100%, but Midland's Black population has substantially grown over the years. And it was kind of that thing before where we knew everyone in town, both Black or not, and now when I go home to visit my parents and such, I find that Midland is a much more diverse place. And I'm not, I actually don't mind when my mom sends me to the grocery store, because I won't run into, people that I know too much anymore. But that's a little bit about Midland. One important thing about Midland is the Dow Chemical Company. So if you are familiar with Dow, you know that it is the backbone of Midland. About 16% of Midland is actually employed by Dow. And so without Dow, in a nutshell, there is no Midland. Midland is very dependent on Dow. Dow is very dependent on Midland, so forth. Dow, just to give some kind of structure to that, Dow contributes a little bit over 70% of the city's total taxable value each year. So again, Dow plays a significant role in Midland. It was the reason why Midland was even founded as a city. And so it's something we'll talk about in a little bit, but also just something to keep in mind. Great. So this quote here is from Anti-Racist Midland, our group. We made a vision for the Midland community when we first initiated ourselves. And what does this quote say? I'll read it here. It's, "We have come together because while we appreciate Midland for its resources, people, and opportunities, we are also aware of the ways our community has and continues to fall short of its potential, namely for its Black and other community members of color. We believe that the only way to counter systemic racism in our community is to realize transformational changes to our existing systems that make them actively anti-racist." All of this is just a formal, fancy way of saying we wanted change, and we wanted to have conversations in the Midland community about racism, what systemic racism looks like, and how we can turn Midland into an anti-racist society. And so with that, Anti-Racist Midland was founded. So these are the 6 founding members of Anti-Racist Midland. You see myself on the top. Right next to me is Connor. To his right is actually my twin brother, Kofi. And to his right is Cameron. She is actually the daughter of one of the 2 Black teachers we have in the Midland Public School District. And at the bottom row, we have Jared and Jonathan. So we are all co-founders of Anti-Racist Midland. So what is Anti-Racist Midland? So we call ourselves a reform group. We don't have a specific agenda that we are trying to pass or anything like that, but we are an anti-racist group hoping to build reform in the Midland community area, and that is our main goal. And we want to do that through education, advocacy, and really just getting the community engaged in these concepts. So we initiated in June 2020 after Midland's Rally for Racial Justice, in which over 2,500 people came together and appeared at this rally, which we were very surprised by, because You know, growing up in Midland, it was not a place that I ever thought 2,500 people would come together and have a rally for racial justice. So myself, Jonathan, Connor, Jared, and my brother actually were all at the rally together, and we were dumbfounded by just how many people were there. And we said, look, there is room to continue the conversation here, and we've got to do something. So we didn't know what that would look like. But we all met in the backyard of Jared's house in the summer after the rally, and Anti-Racist Midland was born. And Cameron soon joined on about a week later, and from there we haven't stopped. And it is namely important to note that we are all products of Midland Public Schools in the greater Midland community. We all grew up in the Midland community. And so with Midland Public Schools kind of binding us all together, we decided first that we wanted to address Midland Public Schools just because it was a shared experience, and we thought it was something tangible we would be able to, you know, work with and kind of make change there. And so, like I said earlier, our emphasis as a group was not to pass any legislation or anything like that, but it was really just to you know, get the community to reflect and highlight the importance of, you know, how people of color and marginalized people in the community are being treated. So we started with a list of 10 demands for Midland Public Schools, and you'll see those on the next slide. But in addition to that, we've also worked on a plethora of other initiatives, including meetings with the superintendent, Board of Education, and various school system players. We have met several times with the City of Midland after we formulated our Midland City Vision, which I will talk about. We've done various consulting work with the City of Midland as well, and we've also helped publish surveys with the City of Midland, such as the Police and Safety Survey, which went out in August of 2020. And also, namely, we founded and published our project, Voices of Black Midland, which we will get into extensively in just a little bit. So we've done quite a bit of community work, but like I said, we started out with Midland Public Schools just because we were all products of Midland Public Schools, and it was something that we all had as a shared experience. Great. So Midland Public Schools. We have a couple demands here that you'll see. First, these are the five initial ones we came up with. There are 10 total, and I'll read the other 5. But here you see the first one was district-wide statement declaring race as an issue within MPS, or Midland Public Schools. Improved curriculum focusing on Black history, racism, and white privilege. Mandatory diversity training for staff from an independent organization. Banning of Confederate flags, swastikas, and other hate symbols on district property. Now, that's very important to me, but I'll talk about that soon. Public commitment to hiring more teachers and administrators of color, and supporting these faculty and of color as well. The other 5 demands that are not listed here include having Midland Public Schools declare themselves as a leader in anti-racism for the surrounding Great Lakes Bay Area. So within Bay City, Saginaw, Midland, and so forth, we wanted Midland to really come through as the leader in anti-racism. We wanted Midland Public Schools to create a centralized public local reporting system to track racial or otherwise prejudicial incidents of discrimination or harassment. 8, we want to develop workshops and provide resources for at-home education of both students and parents. We thought that was very important. 9, allocation of funds for mental health counselors, and that's continuing to be very interesting and very much needed resource in schools. And 10, provide periodic public updates regarding progress towards outlined goals. So a lot of these goals you'll see, or demands that we had, you'll see the kind of common thread here is communication and transparency. And we did this on purpose because when we first started talking to kind of key players within government and school districts, we were quick to get a lot of, oh, these conversations are happening already, or, oh, we already have some things in place for this kind of stuff, so don't you worry. But at the end of the day, the people who are impacted by these conversations weren't made aware of these conversations, nor were they made aware of the actions that resulted from these conversations. So in efforts to reduce performative activism and just kind of a shaded activism, we really, really demanded for communication and open communication, especially with the greater community. And that is a theme we have continued with throughout Anti-Racist Midland, but it's something that we were really, really passionate about when we first started. And it's really important to note that the district was actually very receptive to our demands. They enabled them, they took them, and they used them as their clay pigeon for their diversity, equity, inclusion, or DEI as they call it, efforts, which was really actually nice to see. So if you go to Midland Public Schools today, these are still the 10 demands that they're working through to aim their anti-racist efforts, which is really cool. And some things happen very quickly. Like we know some of these are demands that can happen pretty quickly. So the statement declaring race as an issue was quickly made by the school district, and the Confederate flag, swastikas, and other hate symbols, were also banned rather quickly, which was really nice to see because I know for myself, going to school, I have a twin brother, like I said, Kofi, who was on Anti-Racist Midland's founding group as well. And I used to get so upset with him when he would make me late to school because we shared a car, and when he was late, I was late. And if you're late to school, that means the only place to park is in the row of pickup trucks with Confederate flags on them. And I was always super uncomfortable parking there. So I'd always get super upset with my brother when he was making me late because I would make him drop me off at the door and then make him go and drive and park there and walk to school if he made me late enough that was the only option for parking. And it was also, you could also see Confederate flags just walking around the hallways. School students would often be carrying flags on their backs or have hoodies, t-shirts, etc., with hate symbols and flags on them as well. So I was very, very happy personally to see that mandate go through in a rather quick manner, especially because it was something that we had tried to ban ourselves while we were in high school, and it wasn't something that got passed at the time. So this is a little bit more about where we started with Midland Public Schools, but we also continued on with Midland Public Schools, and we were able to help get a diversity, equity, and inclusion director hired. And this happened in January of 2021. It's about a year and a half after we started working with the school district with ARM. And it was really, really a big step to see this happen. So you can see here on the left-hand side, we had a town hall and Q&A with the DEI director. His name is DJ Hogan or DeAndre. And it was really cool to see him engage with the community because this is the communication a lot of people in the community hadn't seen before. So we hosted this town hall, and it was a very insightful evening just because so many parents, so many students said, hey, like I've been trying to make XYZ happen in the district for this amount of time, and it's never happened. And the district has said, oh, maybe this is happening behind closed doors. But again, going back to that emphasis on communication, no one knew in the community. And so DJ was able to kind of be that bridge. And with ARM, we were able to help kind of gather all of the community's concerns and bridge them together and really figure out where Midland Public Schools wanted to go in terms of its anti-racist efforts. So in addition to hosting town halls and work like this, we also held meetings with the Board of Education. We held just community meetings to hear the community's voices and concerns so that we could adequately represent the community, especially those who were actively engaged in the Midland Public Schools school district at the time, as we had all graduated. And we also collected stories from current students and alumni. There's quite a list of things that people have gone throughout Midland Public Schools, and we wanted to share those stories and not to use them as collateral damage or exploit people's experiences, but to really help others understand what we were talking about. I think a lot of people were very shielded from the fact that things were happening in Midland. You'll often hear people from Midland call it the Midland bubble, and there's a reason for that. I think sometimes Midland is this kind of very picturesque place, and it very much is. It's a great place to grow up. But I think with that Midland bubble, we're sometimes afraid to pop it and become uncomfortable and have these conversations that can sometimes be uncomfortable, and we knew that. So we were able to work with both Midland Public Schools and the community to have these conversations and start them out as well. Great. So our efforts, like I said, didn't stop with Midland Public Schools. We did a lot of social media, and you can see here a few screen grabs from our social media posts, but we did things like get people signed up to vote. It was an election year, so when we first started, so we wanted people to, really get and engage in that way. And we also, like I said, hosted community town halls, collected incident reporting. We had people get involved with us in terms of just outreach and volunteering, and as you'll later see with Voices of Black Midland as well. So we really wanted to engage the community because, like I said, when we first started in June 2020, after the Rally for Racial Justice, we just knew that there was a lot of momentum to be had, and we wanted to let the community continue off of that momentum and carry on and work with us. Great. So this brings us to Voices of Black Midland. So you might ask, what is this project, why we did it? I'll give you the why first, and then I'll kind of explain a little bit more about what it is. So we did this project because we recognized there were two problems in town. One, disconnection and communication, which we talked about, and also lack of historical awareness. And these two issues are actually pretty intimately connected, we realized, and we sought to create something that enabled us to come together for intimate, open conversation with our neighbors, to learn from one another, to analyze these implicit biases that we saw earlier today, and also share these learnings with the greater community. And what is this project? So, Voices of Black Midland by Anti-Racist Midland is a collective kind of collection of interviews that we've done with Midland's Black community. And like I said, it is pretty small. We have 1.5% of Midland it considers themselves Black. And the first families of Midland moved into town in 1960. And so we interviewed Black residents who moved into town in 1960, all the way through young people who are living there today. And so for the project launch, which happened in October 2021, we had collected 23 interviews with current and/or former Midland residents, totaling in 22 hours and 48 minutes. And that number has increased actually since our launch. We're at 27 interviews now. Don't know exactly how many hours that is, but probably around 25, 26 hours of interviewing. So lots of interviewing that we did and lots of stories that were shared. So just to go through the project fast facts, the project began in November 2020, was just an idea of how can we share Midland's Black history in a very interactive and comprehensive way. And we debuted the project in October 2021. So about a year to work on the project, and it was very insightful throughout the entire way. The project was built upon the works of a community historian named Dr. Betty Jones. She's a Black historian in town, and she has done incredible work on Midland's Black history herself. She's written a book even on Midland's Black history. So we really, she was the foundation of a lot of the work that we did with this project. And when we published our project is available online, and it is available through a podcast that I'll talk about in just a second. But it is the most comprehensive digital collection of Midland's Black history to date. And we thought that was really important. The world is moving towards this digital world, for better or for worse. So we wanted to take a way to get, all of the history into one place that can be stored, for infinite amount of time. And interviews, like I said, are available on our project website and through the Midland Our Own Words podcast. And this all happened not because of just Anti-Racist Midland, but we had so much community engagement. So I talked about ARM really wanting to continue the conversation and get people in the community engaged. But we had over 20 volunteers and organizations that helped us, namely Dr. Jennifer Vanette. I'm not sure if she's on today, but she is she's our principal investigator really for the entire project. And each of our interviews was accompanied by a critical commentary and context from her. And she was kind of the one to help build the narrative of Voices of Black Midland. And in addition to the other volunteers who kind of helped interview or organize some work that we did, we had some local community sponsors as well. So we got the Midland County Historical Society involved, the Midland Area Community Foundation, the Midland Center for the Arts, which is actually where we hosted our launch party. The Midland Daily News was able to help out, and the Midland Cultural Awareness Coalition. So really all facets of Midland community members, we were able to get involved. And really anyone who wanted to get involved in somehow in this project was able to get involved. And we're really proud about that. We didn't want to work in a silo. That's one thing ARM has always been proud of, is we want to get other parts of the community involved in our work. And so we're really happy with how many people we were able to interact with. So like I said here before, we have the podcast, Midland in Our Own Words. And so I really enjoyed this part. I listen to podcasts very often and wouldn't consider myself a podcaster, but after this project, I guess I am a low-key podcaster now. But this podcast is not just the Anti-Racist Midland Voices of Black Midland interviews, but it also includes some Midland community members as well. So it's a mix of the two. And so I think this is really interesting because as someone who grew up in Midland, there was a lot of context I learned about Midland, both from the Black perspective and from other community members, just to kind of help understand what Midland is. So, we have church leaders, we have business owners who have given their perspective through the Midland in Our Own Words podcast, but that is coupled all with the Voices of Black Midland interviews, which you will all find here. So this is a screen grab from Spotify, but wherever you listen to your podcasts, it's available. So I know my parents like Apple Music, and I had a coworker who just went right online and typed in Midland in our own words, and it's available to listen. So I have a lot of great information, a lot of good discussions that happen through a lot of these podcast episodes. So I definitely urge you guys to take a listen. All right, so this is just a screen grab, a few of the people we interviewed. Like I said, for the project launch, it was 23 interviews, but you can see here just from images that we interviewed, it's a breadth of people from various backgrounds. So young, old, men, women, people who were working, people who were retired, just quite the range of Midland's Black history was interviewed for this project. All right, so I'm going to give a little bit into what we found when we did this project. And the first thing I want to say is that as someone, again, who grew up in Midland, I didn't know any of this, So in growing up in Midland, we learned a lot about Midland's history in terms of Dow and how that started, which I'll talk about as well. But Midland's Black history was never brought up, and it's something I didn't know anything about. So I learned a significant amount from interviewing folks, from understanding, they're listening to other interviews that they did with other folks, and just coming together with the narrative Jen helped us build. I was really, really, shocked just how much Midland history there was, especially in the Black world. So to start off, Black settlers came to Midland around 1855, and they most definitely strengthened the early life of the community by starting businesses, developing property, and contributing to the culture and arts of Midland. And although they were respected for their contributions and talents, Black people were not exactly welcomed with open arms. So when John Johnson, who was a Black man, arrived in Midland, Michigan, he intended to work for the Larkin lumber mill in town. And after facing discrimination from mill workers due to his race, the owner of the mill, John Larkin, suggested that Johnson train to become a barber, which was one of the few acceptable businesses for Black people in the time. And this is an interesting note because even growing up, one of the few Black businesses in town, Black-owned, I might say, businesses in town was a barbershop. So Midland has, I believe, under 1% of all owned businesses in Midland are Black-owned. And it's interesting that when I think of the 2 or 3 I can name off the top of my head, they were barbershops. And so this is not the first time it's happened. You can see here in 1855 even, that was something that was happening. In addition to John Johnson's experience, Grace Farmer was someone who won, the Black woman who won her school's annual typing award. But for the first time ever, the award was not given at a school assembly to celebrate the winner, but instead her teacher quietly handed it to her after school. These are just 2 examples that we can see the way the early Black community faced discrimination in Midland. And this did not, stop at this point, but Midland's Black community did remain very small for a plethora of reasons, and some of which I'll talk about in the next slide. But prominent families within the city were the Johnsons and the Highgates. And the farmers, Grace Farmer, who I just talked about, were also known in the county. They lived in Midland County. And when Oliver Highgate passed away in 1943, his death also represented the end of Black Midland residents for a while. But that continued. The end of Midland's Black break in Midland, I could say, was ended by this man here, Dr. Lynn Dorman. And Dow Chemical began in 1987, and he was Dow's first Black chemist. So there were lots of reasons, likely systemic or otherwise, that Black people didn't settle in Midland in large numbers. When Herbert H. Dow, who's we call him the father of Dow, when he began the chemical company in 1897, Black people weren't allowed to work as full-time employees, and they were only allowed to work as supplemental day workers. And so some of the best jobs in the community had to offer, they were denied to Black people just because of this. And it wasn't again until 1960 when Dow hired Dr. Lynn Dorman as its first Black chemist that professional jobs finally became available to non-white people in town. And as Dr. Betty Jones, who I talked about earlier, wrote in her book, early Black Midlanders entered a white community which had little exposure to the rich heritage of Black Midland and their culture, and little appreciation for values, strengths, and aspirations of the African American community and experiencing the United States. So for the most part, Midlanders were generally friendly to Black folks, as the Dormans recall, but they seemed to receive their new neighbors with kind of awkward stares and naive curiosity. Although many in the community experienced eagerness to make connections, the cultural differences between the Dormans and other Black families that soon moved to Midland meant that it would take some time for these connections to be made. Another reason that you can see here that the Black Midland community did not grow so quickly are housing covenants. So housing covenants are restrictive addendums to housing titles that prevented white folks from selling their homes to Black people. And in Midland, the housing market boomed after the World War I, as it did nationwide, and again after the 1930s, as Wheeler Dow sensed another world war on the horizon, and that would increase production of homes, of course. And the new developments that were built in town for housing, many of which are orchestrated by Dow Chemical, keep that in mind, all came with restrictive covenants that not only barred the sale of houses and homes from Black people, but also barred any rental agreements with Black people. So this in itself was a restrictive clause that kind of kept the Black community from Midland from growing. And it's likely still, I think, at least, a reason why the Black community in Midland hasn't grown as quickly as other communities in Midland, just because housing covenants did stop the initial influx of Black people moving to town. And these housing covenants were not, unique to Midland. They were common across the United States, and they were one of the primary drivers for segregation in housing and education. And like I said, this still remains today. It's very prevalent in some major cities across the United States, but I still think, like I said, it's still prevalent in Midland, and it still impacts how Midland is sorted out today. And even if Black people at the time could get hired for good blue-collar jobs, they couldn't find housing. So again, this barred people from moving to Midland and really establishing a career here. So the fact was that Black people simply didn't move to Midland. It's likely a reason why Saginaw, which is the town right next door, has such a large Black community, whereas Midland does not. These housing covenants were outlawed by the Supreme Court in 1948, but of course its effects were still felt for decades to come, and even today. There are lots of racial violence acts in Midland. Some of them I learned just through these interviews that I did, and some of them I had known just from hearing it from whether they were family friends or otherwise. But some of these listed here include KKK demonstrations and cross plantings. At least one noose hung up in the yard of Black residents. If you're interested in that one particularly, it is in my interview I did with the Wilkins family, and that was a very, very telling interview. So I urge you all to listen to that one if you have a chance. Midlanders have on two occasions blackened up and performed the minstrel show, Darktown Jamboree, in both 1949 and 1959. And Black students have reported several times in Midland hearing cracking whip sounds aimed at them in the hallways. And as most recent, a gorilla costume photo in which a student took a picture with someone in a gorilla costume and mentioned that they had taken a picture with Dow's football player who was Black at the time, a Black female football player who was Black. And it was the photo was posted online in which the gorilla costume depicted this Black football player. So you may think these are all small things or just one thing another, but these all have compounding effects on the way Midlanders maybe have implicit biases towards Black folks, or also the way Black folks in Midland grow up. And I know the way I grew up in Midland is, very much shaped by these historical events. And I know the way that future generations of Black students in Midland will also be influenced by hopefully some of our work, but also just the way that prior mindsets have also, made Midland. I will say parents in the general Midland community have been very supportive of our work, and a lot of parents and community members have not remained silent when these things happen. They have definitely demonstrated their demands for wanting better at school board meetings. They've definitely issued the need for diversity, equity, inclusion forums, and a lot of, we had so much support just from the greater community and lots of Midland Public Schools parents to come to us and just say how much they're fighting for equity and inclusion in the classroom and outside within the greater Midland community. And what I want to share on the next few slides are just a few various kind of snippets or grabs that we had from our interviews. So here you can see Aaron Chapman, I might know of as well. He is the son of one of the two Black professors or teachers in the Midland Public Schools district. So one of the quotes he said in his interview is, "Black was my identity. I was Black before I was a person." I think that's a really interesting quote he brings up, especially being the son of one of the two Black teachers in town. That label was on him before he really even knew what it meant. And I think this is a sentiment that many of us in the Black community in Midland kind of felt growing up there. The next screen grab or quote I want to share is from Miss Linda Holman. And she said, "Racism is real, and so is white privilege." And I think that as long as you are living in that, you don't see everything else. So someone has to come along and remind you. I'll let you all sit with that quote, but there's a lot of truth to that one as well. This is from Mr. Ron Hun, and he said, "We all lived in different neighborhoods so that we didn't want to make a ghetto of any church, so we spread out to churches and neighborhoods." So this was a really, really interesting interview for me to listen to, just because he had been in Midland for some time. And when a lot of Black Midlanders finally started to move into town, they were very strategic not to live in the same area because they didn't want to make a ghetto out of any area of town like he describes here. And even when they started going to church in town, they didn't go to the same churches because they didn't want to make a ghetto of any church, or they didn't want to make, one specific Black church. They didn't want, to pull Midland away from those areas just because that's where Black people were congregating together. And this is something I really resonated with in my interview. I interviewed our co-founder as well, Jonathan Hayes. And in our interview, we talked about this because Jonathan and I, we went to rival high schools, opposite town high schools, but we definitely knew who each other were all throughout high school. But we were never really friends in high school. And it's kind of crazy now because John, of course, going through this experience, John and I are such close friends now. But in our interview, we talked about the fact that we likely didn't become friends in high school just because we didn't want people to think, oh, why are the Black kids coming together? Or what are they doing? They're conspiring against us, or what's going on? So to make our white peers more comfortable, we likely never really came together and, banded together and fought for these things. And Jonathan did a lot of that work solo, to be honest, in high school. He was the one who advocated to have Martin Luther King Day honored by the school district, and he did a lot of DEI work on his own at Midland High and within the district. But then, my brother and I were at the rival town high school doing our own separate work as well. And I think what we learned through ARM is the value of coming together and, again, having that open communication throughout the community. And in our interview, we talk about, what some of these changes may have happened long, long ago had we, come together and, really banded together despite not wanting to make a quote unquote ghetto, as Ron kind of highlights here, of any situation. So this is an interview that I personally resonated with a lot because of the conversation I had with Jonathan as well. Great. So the next thing the last quote here I'll highlight today is, "The world is changing around us, and you can either embrace it or run away from it. And chances are that the organizations and communities that run away from it are going to be left behind." So this is from Mr. Ebenezer Deborah. And I really, really like this quote because I think it shows where I want to see Midland go. I think Midland, like I said, the Midland bubble concept is one that is soon going to be popped by the greater world, whether we like it or not. And that's why we set a demand for Midland Public Schools to be a leader in anti-racist work, because we wanted Midland to be, the step forward before the rest of the world. And at the end of the day, we're all going to make that step forward as a society, and it's up to you whether you want to go with them or watch them from behind and eventually join. And I truly believe that for Midland as well. And so this quote that Mr. Ebenezer Deborah shared, I think really embodies the mindset that Anti-Racist Midland has for Midland, and especially in the long term, just because we know that Midland can be that anti-racist leader, and we're willing to, walk with Midland hand by hand, step by step, and walk Midland in that direction. All right, all of that to say, that was our project in a very short nutshell. There's so much information to be shared on our project website. So I do urge all of you guys to go on the website and take a look. We have lesson plans for if there are any teachers in the room, and everyone's story and interviews are highlighted on the website and shared through the narrative that we built. And the key takeaways I want to share here are ARM and Voices of Black Midland have taught me what it means to live with history. And like I mentioned earlier, until ARM and until this project even came to fruition, I really hadn't ever reflected on what it truly meant to be Black in Midland. I'd learned the historical context, behind Midland's racial relations and the way that they were growing up, but I never realized how much Midland's Black history had shaped my upbringing in Midland. And when we go back to the beginning of my talk today, when we did the implicit biases, it's evident that these biases affect the way we think. And I think these actions, these thoughts, they affect history. And I think it's very important for me to reflect on how history has and will continue at the end of the day to continue our affect our history. And I think it's really important to bring up education, to have these conversations so that we can be aware of how our implicit biases affect our history and hence affect the way we live with history. So I hope you all take the chance to live with history that we've put through on this website. And because it truly is, there's a lot to unpack here. There's a lot to explore. There's a lot to learn here. And I think that's the main goal of today, is just to get people to continue conversations and want to learn and want to educate themselves so that we can continue to make ourselves aware of the implicit biases that we see. And on the last note, I'll just leave us with one quote here, which is, "History, despite its wrenching pain, cannot be unlived, but if faced with courage, need not be lived again." That's from Maya Angelou. And my hope is that Midland has the courage and commits to the working of facing past pain so that we can move forward and become a more inclusive community, and that we also might be encouraged by the examples shared in these oral histories, because there's truly a lot of brave stories in there and a lot of really humbling stories in there that I would love for every one of you guys to hear. So thank you all. I really appreciate you taking the time to join me today, and I hope you guys all have a good rest of your day and really take the time to explore the link here ahead of time. But happy to take any questions that may come up.
Thank you so much.
I think if you stop share, then we could maybe see you again during the question. I think that would be helpful for all of you. And I am coming to you all in just a moment if you've been holding in any questions or comments. Oh, there you are. Thank you. First of all, how about just a round of applause for our speaker? Thank you. Okay, and we're going to go around with the mic this time for the questions. So I'm doing a little bit of a Donahue thing here for you all. So you are also with me in being able to remember this person. So the people online can hear the questions. So does anybody have any comments or questions that they'd like to ask? Sure.
Hi, thank you for your talk. It was quite interesting and has given us a lot to think about. So I learned about the Great Migration of Blacks from the South to the North, and it seems like Midland just didn't have that, or am I wrong? That's what I was wondering.
So could you say, I missed the last part of your question.
Was there a Great Migration? Was Midland part of the Great Migration? It seems not, from 1920s on.
Yeah, that's a great question. And yeah, because of, at least, from my understanding, because of the housing covenants, it really kind of was secluded from that Great Migration that did happen. Because, like I said, Saginaw is a town that is just 30 minutes away from Midland. I went to school in Saginaw for a number of years, and the demographics are almost completely flipped. The classroom I had in Saginaw was worlds away from the classroom I had when I went to school in Midland. So yeah, it seemed as if it kind of stopped in Saginaw and didn't continue further north into Midland. And I believe part of that was because some of the housing covenants that had that lasting effect on to how many Black people did move into Midland originally.
That's okay.
Thank you. That was really inspiring. It makes me want to go back to my high school community and make change. It must have been empowering for you to do that in your own community. My question is about gathering interviewees for the project where you're compiling stories and recording the podcasts. Did you face any hesitancy from those people, or how were you able, I guess, to reach out and recruit and make them feel safe to share stories for the project?
Sure, yeah, great question. So we didn't really face any hesitancy. I think the only thing was maybe we had 2 or 3 people who didn't want their photos shown on the website when the end project was published. But besides that, I think we were faced with a lot of positive feedback, just because these folks had never been asked to share their history before. And I think a lot of, when you go through and listen to these interviews, you'll see that a lot of people had stories to share that had really never been asked, and they've never really had the place to share these stories. And so people were very receptive to it. And in terms of how we got people, like I said, Black community is very small in Midland. So it was just a text to this person and then a text to that person. And it kind of word of mouth happened because especially connecting with some of the older generation in terms of people who had moved to Midland initially. I interview one person, they say, oh, I have a good friend that you probably want to interview. They'll, here's their information, and that person connected me and that person. It was kind of just a little network. We probably had like 5 or 6 people on our radar at first, and then we ended up, like I said, with the 27. So it was pretty easy to get word of mouth going once people got drift of the project happening.
Yeah. So, next.
I might add, I would also still love to hear what people's thoughts were on the activity. So if you don't have questions too, I'm also, open to hear what people thought of that.
Question. I get the impression that you felt that being a company town, Dow was in many ways responsible for the keeping the community white. Since that time, has Dow done anything actively to overcome the past, and have they provided any support to you?
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, I think systemically, Dow can play a role in a role in the way Midland was shaped. As at the beginning, I said without Dow, there is no Midland, right? But I think Dow has actually been a very key player in diversifying Midland, and they know that. So in order to attract top talent, they know they need to keep their classrooms diverse. They need to keep the town diverse. And Dow was actually, we worked with Dow initially when Anti-Racist Midland was started, just to kind of figure out how we can work together. And they threw a lot of resources at us, to be honest. They were hands up, sleeves rolled up, ready to help us out. And I think that just shows how much they've done in terms of reflection as a company, as community members, and as a large community stakeholder, just to really understand what they can do for the community. So we've very much been supported by Dow, and we continue to challenge them, and they continue to challenge us too in terms of wanting the best for the community. And we've worked together throughout this process. So I think Dow has done a phenomenal job, really, in terms of diversifying Midland, because at the end of the day, they do play a big role in determining what Midland looks like.
Thank you. Any other additional questions?
A couple questions, and I thought you might address before we close here. And the first one is maybe a little bit more difficult than the next one. And so the first one is, did you face any opposition within the community, and how did you handle it? And then my other question is, what's next for Anti-Racist Midland?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, definitely faced opposition. For example, my father's physician in town, and he had one of his patients tell him that his kids are ruining the town with this nonsense they're doing. So we definitely face opposition, namely in the press. So lots of people were going online and writing stuff on our social media accounts, and so forth. So just opposition in that way. We also had people come to board meetings that we were presenting at, and tell us, try to interrupt that, or tell us that our efforts were useless, unneeded, things like that. So we did face backlash in that sense, and again, specifically with when it came to education. So, we did ask the school district to initiate more inclusive Black history, not just learning about MLK one day a year. And, there was backlash from parents on that. But I think overall, we tried to tune that out, and the support was very overwhelming as well. So I think we decided to run with that. And I think when you ask about what's next, that's kind of, still in the direction of all those demands we first initially brought to Midland Public Schools are not done. There's still a lot of work in terms of training teachers, getting a curriculum built in, which, definitely is a process. It's not something that can be done overnight. So we're continuing to work with the school district on that. But also continuing this project. We're hoping to have it turn to a speaker series in Midland, in which we can bring speakers with the funding we've gotten from the community, and bring speakers in to talk about these topics, especially with the younger folks. And we are formulating all of our posters and things like that to go with the project that will be traveling through our school districts as a traveling exhibit. So it's all virtual right now, but we will get it into schools as a traveling exhibit too. So that's something we're looking forward to.
Thank you for those responses. Very enlightening.
Does anybody have any other questions or comments that they wanted to add? Yep, I'm over here now. Sorry, Pam.
Well, I'm just curious now, you mentioned your father was a physician, and was he recruited to come to Midland? If the population, is Dow, you mentioned Dow has been supportive of diversifying the city, so a two-part question, I guess. So does that mean that Dow works to recruit Black chemists and other people to the professional community in Midland? Just kind of your own story.
Yeah, great question. So yeah, my father was recruited not from Dow specifically, but from the hospital. And we originally came from Ann Arbor. So I was born in Ann Arbor, and that's where we were living before. And so my dad was doing his training there. And so I think in the sense of how Dow plays into that is Dow kind of sets the tone, right? So we're running a marathon here. If Dow goes out the gate sprinting, so will the other large players in town. So the hospital, other banks and, other large employers in town. And I think that's kind of what happened. So as Dow started to, really prioritize diversity, so did other large key players in the community as well. And I think that's something similar to what happened, potentially when my dad was originally first coached to come to Midland. And we definitely started out when things were just getting started. But I think now it's, you get a lot more families who are coming from very diverse, from around the world in Midland, and they come to Midland, they see that whether they're affiliated with Dow or not, they see how diverse it is. So I think, Dow definitely sets the pace with that, but they didn't directly approach my dad, no. Does that answer your question? Perfect.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, we have time for just one more question if somebody has a.
Just one more.
I was just wondering if you're able to form partnerships with your local historical institutions, and then how would they be able to support your mission and preserve your message?
Yeah, I just want to make sure I mention how we have partners with historical institutions so far. Okay, great. Yeah, so we partnered with the Midland County Historical Society, and they were namely there to help us with just primary research, figuring out what even exists out there in terms of Midland's Black history. But then they were very also instrumental in getting us set up with our actual projects. So at first we needed help with transcribing all of our interviews and things like that. They were instrumental in helping us get that set up. They were also able to help us kind of figure out how we wanted to formulate and present history, because that's something they're very well versed in. And so they were able to help us with that. And eventually they also came to us with the idea for the podcast. And so we worked with them really in just actually the dissemination of information we got from the interviews. So they were really instrumental in that. And we'll continue to work with them as we work on getting all of this out into the traveling exhibit into the school districts as well.
So you're partnering with the Historical Society to work on
An exhibit.
Yes,
Right.
yes.
So I just want to clarify, am I hearing that the Historical Society is offering, sort of like their expertise in how to present history in different kinds of ways,
Yes.
and helping you
They've
to access
helped
that?
us.
I'm sorry,
Yeah,
go ahead.
exactly. So when we travel and exhibit, I was like, I don't know what this entails. We're going to do one post or two, half online, half on, and they definitely, of course, have the experience in terms of how to actually appropriately share information with the community. That's what they specialize in, of course. And so they've helped us, really formulate and solidify those ideas together.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
So I think that we are coming to a close for our event. So I would like to thank you again so much. You're over here for me. For zooming in